drop into a moment with me. You're somewhere ordinary. Maybe it's a friend's backyard at a summer birthday party or a Sunday at your sibling's house, and there's a kid running around, someone else's kid, and for a split second, something moves in you. Not a thought exactly, more like a twinge of something running in the background, something more like a pull. And then, just as quickly as it arrived, you file it away somewhere in the back of your mind and you go refill your drink. Maybe you've had that moment. Maybe you've had it more than once. Maybe it comes for you in different shapes. Maybe it's a sudden clarity that you want to call your ex because you two had talked about kids once. Or a weird restlessness that hits on your birthday and kind of lingers for a few days. Or maybe it's a sense of inexplainable sadness when a relationship that wasn't quite right to begin with starts to feel like it's slipping away. I want to give that feeling a name today. I'm calling it the legacy pull, and I want to tell you why it matters. Not as a pressure point, not as a countdown, but as a real human signal that deserves to be heard. Because right now, there is almost no cultural space for you to name any of this. The biological clock is something that happens to women. Men, we're told, have all the time in the world. Charlie Chaplin is famously known for having a baby at 73, and now Al, the Godfather Pacino, is making babies in his 80s. So what we've seen is that men just don't feel the same kind of urgency around family and legacy. Or if they do, they certainly don't admit it. Well, that is some bullshit. And today, we're going there. Stick around. Throw out the rules, forget the cliches. This isn't about the perfect profile or the perfect date. It's about real connection. It's time to strip away the masks, shed the stories, and drop those old patterns that no longer serve you. Tired of dating advice that doesn't fit? So are we. Welcome to Stripped, Drop Your Patterns, where conscious dating isn't about following a script. It's about embracing your whole self and attracting the kind of love that sets your soul on fire. I'm Rachel J., the connection coach and your host. Let's get real. Welcome back, my friend. I am so glad you're here. I took a little time off last week because my dear friend came to visit and I wanted to be fully present with her in the time that we had. Now, I do have a little bit of a cold, so just FYI, this vocal change is actually not my attempt at doing sexy Phoebe. This is just where we're at today. But if you ask nicely, maybe I'll do my rendition of Smelly Cat later. Okay, enough of that. This is Stripped, Drop Your Patterns. I'm your host, Rachel J., the connection coach, and this is a podcast all about the things that we do to protect ourselves from love and why those things eventually stop working. If you're new here, welcome, settle in, make yourself at home. If you've been with me for a while, well, you know the show doesn't really do surface level, so buckle up. Today, we're talking about the legacy pull, the urgency, the longing, the quiet grief that men carry around fatherhood and family, and the fear that time is moving without them. All of it. And I want to say up front, this is not a panic episode. I am not here to scare you or pressure you or tell you that your window is closing. I'm here to give you language for something real that you've very likely been feeling without having the words for it. Because biological clock doesn't resonate for everyone. And when we don't have the words for something, it tends to come out sideways. And in relationships, sideways can cost you years. So let's start with the cultural part of this, okay? The conversation around biological clocks and fertility timelines and the pressure to find someone in time is almost entirely coded as a women's experience. And that's not nothing. Women do carry a particular kind of biological reality around childbearing that is different from men's. It is a real thing, and it's often minimized and turned into the butt of a joke, which is part of the reason I'm using different language for it. But also, as I touched on in the intro, it's not so much a biological issue for men the way it is for women. So while we often refer to this fear of time running out as a female concern, what I've noticed in my work and what the research is increasingly confirming is that men in their late 30s are actually very aware that time is moving, and they feel it around legacy, around family, around the specific fear, and this one shows up over and over in the men that I work with, of being 60 years old at a high school graduation, of being the dad that everyone mistakes for the grandfather, of missing the particular physical experience of fatherhood that youth makes easier, like running with your kid, throwing a ball, and not being exhausted by their energy. And here's the thing that the data actually tells us, which completely inverts the cultural story. A 2023 Pew Research survey found that among young adults without children, 57% of men say that they want to be parents someday, compared to only 45% of women. Now, we could probably do a whole separate episode on why that is likely the case, but the takeaway here is that men are more likely to want kids than women now. We just have no culturally sanctioned way to say so. And when you look at what men are actually searching for privately on the Googs, it gets even more specific. Men in their late 30s are typing things like, is 40 too old to have a first child as a man? And success versus family as a single man over 35? And coping with aging when biological clock is ticking. They're sitting in forums talking, often for the first time, about the fear of not being able to play football with their son in their 50s. They're talking about the regret of not locking things in sooner with the one I probably should have married, and probably didn't because they were focused on all the other things that their communities were pressuring them to focus on. Because you're young, you have plenty of time to settle down and start a family. These men are talking about feeling an urgency to find someone and hopefully quickly advance to having a child. This fear is described by men as a deadline that is real. Their words, no matter how progressive we like to consider ourselves. Now, you might be wondering who these people are. What kind of men are searching these questions and having these conversations online? Maybe you're feeling a bit of resistance coming up, so you're picturing a certain type of man who is expressing these fears so that it feels a little less personal for you. If so, that is understandable and I get it. And it is for you that I share the following examples. Henry Cavill, who recently played Superman and is one of the most visibly masculine figures in mainstream culture, gave an interview to Men's Health UK a few years ago where he said something that I have heard from many men time and time again in my experience, and I think a lot of men in their late 30s will feel this in their own resonance. He said, if I ever have kids one day, I want to be the dad who's running around after them. And if I do have kids, even now, it's starting to get quite late. But I want to be a fit and healthy dad, not hobbling around like, okay, I'm just going to catch a breather. Henry Cavill, Superman, said that out loud in a major magazine interview. And then at 41, he announced he's expecting his first child. I bring him up not because his path is necessarily yours, but because that quote names something so precisely. It's not abstract or vague. It's physical. It's specific. It's about the kind of father he wants to be. Present, capable, running after a kid at full speed. And that desire, sitting underneath all the armor of high achievement and masculine performance, is exactly what I'm calling the legacy pull. George Clooney, another mainstream stud, regardless of his advancing age. Ladies, am I right? I know you're nodding emphatically. He's the other side of this conversation, and he's worth mentioning because he represents the fear made real. George Clooney waited until 56 to have kids and ended up with twins, and has since been candid about what that actually feels like. He's joked that by the time his son accomplishes anything meaningful, he'll be gumming his bread. He's talked about the sheer physical running around of parenting in his 60s being the hardest part. And that is the specific image driving so much of the urgency in men who are in their mid to late 30s and staring down 40, not an abstract deadline, but the very concrete picture of being the grandfather at the birthday party instead of the dad on the floor building blocks. So instead of all of this living somewhere conscious and nameable, it goes buried. And it comes out, not surprisingly, in relationships. Here's where I want to get specific because I think recognizing your own patterns is the first step to having any power of them. And if you've been with me for a minute, I think you know that too. The legacy pull tends to show up behaviorally in a few distinct ways, and none of them look like what you'd expect. It doesn't usually look like a man sitting down and thoughtfully examining his desire to be a father, right? No, it doesn't look like that at all. It looks a little more like this. It looks like staying too long in a relationship that you already know isn't right. You haven't left, and when you're honest with yourself, part of the reason is that leaving means starting over, and starting over takes time, and time is the thing that you're privately worried about. So you stay, not because you're deeply in love, because you're hedging. Researchers actually have a term for this now, placeholder behavior, and it describes exactly this dynamic. Men remaining in unfulfilling relationships because the fear of being single for another year or two feels like it costs more than the relationship itself. And that calculation, when it's running quietly in the background, tends to cost everyone. It looks like sudden urgency in new relationships. Things accelerate faster than they should because there's a quiet desperation, underneath the pace. You're not fully conscious of it, but you're moving quickly because the back of your mind is doing math, and the math has a deadline in it that you haven't quite said out loud yet. Again, culture has made a mockery of aging women who gave off the slightest hint of desperation signals. So it's important to note that this time concern is real for both sexes. So let's stop with the double standards and normalize it. It can also look like unexpectedly intense grief when a longer relationship ends. Grief that feels disproportionate to how good the relationship actually was. Because what you're grieving isn't just her. It's the future that you'd started to construct around her. The idea of her. The kids you'd maybe imagined. The life that felt, even if imperfectly, like it was going somewhere. It looks like the weird pull toward an ex when you see that she's moved on, had a baby, built the life you two had vaguely gestured toward. That's not necessarily love. That's selective memory. That's longing. And they're different things even when they feel the same in the middle of the night. I want to pause here for just a second and just invite you to notice. Do any of these sound familiar for you? As always, not as a judgment, genuinely just as information. Just notice what's coming up. So we've talked about what the legacy pull looks like in your dating behavior. But I want to go a layer deeper because I think this is where it gets really interesting and where most conversations about this topic stop a little too soon. The physical fear is real, that I don't want to be hobbling around while my kid is 8 years old fear. That's real and it's valid and it lives in the body. But underneath even that is something older and more fundamental. It's a question that high-achieving men tend to hit somewhere in their late 30s without quite knowing what to call it. And the question is this. If no one inherits what I've built, did any of it actually matter? Well, there's an ancient concept for this. Philosophers and historians call it the empty house, from the Greek oikos eremos, and it described the particularly undesirable fate of a man who died without an heir. Not just the loss of the bloodline, but the disappearance of everything he'd built and stood for. No one to carry the name forward. No one to tend the fire, inherit the lands, etc. You may have heard of a little something called the midlife crisis. Well, this is another sexist cliche, this time typically geared toward men. It's a phrase often used when we see middle-aged men suddenly buying sexy sports cars, working out, or dating much younger women. In reality, this age and stage is typically when a man becomes aware of his mortality and evaluates how well he followed the script, aka gender role conditioning, and whether his achievements will outlast him. Enter fear of the empty house and the heightened urge to start a family. And here's the thing, this is not a modern neurosis. This is one of the oldest wiring patterns in human history. Because for most of recorded civilization, legacy wasn't a feeling, it was a strategy. The aristocratic marriages of medieval Europe, the political alliances of ancient Rome and China, the dynastic unions of virtually every empire that ever left a record. None of them were primarily about love. They were about bloodlines, about ensuring that what a man built didn't dissolve the moment he died, about the empire, the estate, the name, the land, securing alliances, all of it depended on there being an heir, someone to inherit it, someone to carry it into the next generation. Without that, everything a man had accumulated simply ceased to exist as his. It scattered. The house was empty, so to speak. We're a long way from the transactional dynasty marriages of yore, but arranged marriages do still exist culturally, and even if matchmaking isn't part of your culture, deep biological wiring just doesn't check the century for relevance. We still see it with CEOs of legacy corporations and in Nepo baby culture. The instinct that drove those dynastic calculations is the same instinct sitting in the chest of a 38-year-old high achiever who can't quite name why his apartment feels too quiet, or why he keeps almost calling an ex that he knows wasn't right for him. It is ancient. It is in the cells. And our modern culture, which tells men that they have all the time in the world, that legacy is something you build in a conference room, that the biological clock is exclusively a woman's concern, offers no real container for it. Al Pacino said something that I think gets right to the center of this. He's in his 80s, he has 3 adult children, and yes, 1 toddler, and has never been married. Most of his life, he said, has been focused on the work, and what he's come to understand is that everything he's built, the body of work, the achievements, the memories, they only stay in the air if there's someone there to tend them after he's gone. He's not worried about his legacy because his kids will take care of that. His children aren't a footnote to his legacy. They are the mechanism by which it survives at all. That is the fear underneath the legacy pull when you trace it all the way back. It's not simply that you want to love someone and be loved. It's that everything you've built, everything you've worked for, optimized, fought for, stayed late for, will eventually evaporate if there is no one to carry it forward. You could do everything right on paper and still end up, in the oldest and most human sense of the word, with an empty house. I'm bringing all of this up because I want you to understand that this is not pathology. This is not something to be embarrassed about or dismiss as a midlife cliche. This is one of the most fundamental human fears in existence. And naming it, which is what we're doing right now, is the beginning of being able to work with it instead of being run by it. And until now, it's been running without you even realizing it. Now here's where I want to bring in a concept that I've talked about in earlier episodes, because it is the through line on all of this. If you haven't yet listened to the episode, The Man Behind the Glass, go back. We went deep on gender role conditioning there, and it's directly relevant to today. Gender role conditioning, or GRC for short, is the set of rules that we absorb as children about what it means to be a man or a woman. And one of the central rules of the masculine playbook is this: you do not need. You provide, you protect, you perform, but you do not need. Needing is weakness. Needing is dependence. Needing is a crack in the armor. And what is the legacy pull if not a form of needing? Needing to matter to someone in a specific embodied generational way, needing to pass something forward, needing to be not just professionally relevant, but personally beloved by people who share your DNA and will carry your story forward, needing to not die in an empty house with no one there to tend the fire, no one to say, that was my father's, no one to keep everything you built from going silent. That is a profound need. And GRC has told most of the men I work with that they're not allowed to have it, let alone name it. So the feeling goes underground, and it drives behavior that looks like something else entirely. It looks like staying too long in the wrong relationship, or rushing too fast in a new one, or grieving out of proportion when something ends. It looks like placeholder behavior dressed up as practicality, and urgency dressed up as chemistry. It's not a character flaw. It's conditioning. And conditioning, unlike character, can be changed. The neuroscience on this is unambiguous. You can build new neural pathways at any age. You can learn to recognize a feeling before it turns into a behavioral pattern. You can start making conscious choices where you've only ever made reactive ones. But first, you have to be willing to say, I feel a pull, and it is telling me something. I want to make a distinction that I think is really important here because I don't want this episode to become one more source of urgency or pressure in your life. There is already too much of that. There's a difference between the panic of the legacy pull and the longing underneath it. The panic is reactive. It makes you stay in misaligned relationships, rush intimacy, reach backward toward exes, or shut down altogether because the math feels too overwhelming to look at. Panic, when it's running the show, usually makes things worse. It's the reason a man stays 3 years longer than he should with someone he knows isn't right. The legacy pull has gone underground and turned into fear, and fear makes us grip what's familiar instead of building what we actually want. But the longing is something different. The longing is human and honest, and when you actually feel it clearly without the panic layered on top, it's information about what you want your life to look like. It's not a countdown timer, it's a compass. It's the difference between running from something and moving toward something. The men I've sat with who have done the deepest work on this describe a shift something like, I moved from being afraid of running out of time to being clear about what I actually want. And from clarity, they made different choices. They stopped tolerating relationships that were going nowhere because they were privately terrified of being alone. They started being more honest and earlier on about what they were looking for and why. They stopped performing casualness about something that they actually deeply cared about. A 2025 sociological study introduced the concept of misconnect to describe what happens when single men in their 30s deeply want fatherhood and family, but they can't establish the intimate partnership that would make it possible. The term itself is worth sitting with because misconnect isn't a failure of desire. It's a failure of the skills that create connection. And skills, unlike fate, can be learned. That shift from panic to clarity, from misconnect to real connection, is available to you. But it starts with being willing to name the longing in the first place. I want to offer you something to take with you from this episode, and this one is very simple and it doesn't require anything except a few quiet minutes. At some point today, when you have a moment to yourself, in the car, on the train, on a walk, before you fall asleep, I want you to try something. Put one hand on your chest, just lightly, and ask yourself this question without trying to answer it analytically. Don't solve it, just feel into it. What do I actually want my life to look like in 10 years? Not what you think you should want, not what would impress anyone, not the version of the answer that sounds appropriately ambitious and not too desperate. The real one. And then just notice what comes up in your body before you notice what comes up in your mind. Is there a tightness somewhere? A softness? A pang? A pull toward something specific? Or even a sadness that surprises you? Whatever arises, let it just be information, not an emergency. You don't have to do anything with it today. You just have to be willing to see it. That's the beginning of moving from the panic to the longing, from the reactive pattern to the conscious choice. Here's what I want to leave you with. The culture will catch up on this eventually. Men will increasingly be given permission to talk about what it means to feel the legacy pull, to want a family and feel the time pressure around that in a real embodied way. But eventually isn't now. And you don't have to wait for cultural permission to have your own private reckoning with what you want. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're not somehow less of a man for feeling a quiet grief about the family you haven't built yet. Or a deep pull toward a legacy that includes more than your career and your apartment and your number in your industry. That pull is one of the most human things about you. And if Henry Cavill, one of the most physically formidable men alive, can say out loud that he's worried about being the dad who can't keep up with his own kids, then maybe there's room for you to say something like that too. At least to yourself, at least privately. You don't have to perform indifference about this. Not here. The good news is, the thing you want is available to you. Your beloved is out there. The family that you've been imagining in your quieter moments is possible. but not if the legacy pull is running you from a reactionary place instead of guiding you from a place of clarity. That's what the work is for. That's what the show is for. And that's what I'm here for. If this episode landed for you, I'd really love it if you share it, because I know there are men in your life who have never heard this conversation and who might need to. That's how this show grows, and that's how we start to change the culture around what men are allowed to feel and name and ask for. And if you're ready to go deeper than what a podcast episode can offer, if you want a structured way to start working through the patterns that have been running in the background of your dating life, including the ones we talked about today, then I invite you to check out Magnetic. It's my 6-week self-guided app built specifically for high-achieving men who want to do the inner work without it feeling like therapy. The next cohort is opening up soon, so you can get on the waitlist at theconnectioncoachonline.kit.com/magnet list. I'll leave the link in the show notes. It's a little easier. Thanks so much for being here today. I am Rachel J, and this is Stripped. Drop your patterns. And I will see you next week. Bye for now.